I'm Rebecca, 29, and I've spent my entire life coming second to my younger sister. But when our family lawyer called us all together for the reading of my grandmother's will, the silence that followed his words changed everything I thought I knew about love, legacy, and what it really means to be valued by your family. What happened in that mahogany-paneled office didn't just shock my parents and sister into stunned silence. It revealed a truth that had been hidden for decades, waiting for the right moment to surface. Before I tell you about that life-changing afternoon, I need you to understand how we got there, because this story isn't just about an inheritance. It's about a pattern of favoritism that started before I could even walk, and how sometimes the people who see us most clearly aren't the ones living under the same roof. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the suburban hills of Westchester County, New York, the Mitchell family looked picture-perfect from the outside. My father, David Mitchell, was a successful corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions. My mother, Catherine, had put her psychology degree on hold to focus on raising what everyone called her beautiful girls. Our colonial-style house, with its pristine white picket fence and manicured lawn, was the kind of place where neighborhood kids gathered for birthday parties and summer barbecues. But inside those walls, a different story was unfolding, one where love came with conditions, and those conditions seemed to favor only one of the Mitchell daughters. The inequality started so early that I sometimes wonder if it began before I was even born. My parents had tried for 3 years to have their first child, going through fertility treatments and heartbreak before I finally arrived. You'd think that would make me precious to them, the long-awaited miracle baby they'd dreamed of. Instead, it seemed to set an impossible standard that I could never meet. I was barely 2 years old when my sister Emma was born, and from that moment the dynamic in our house shifted permanently. Emma was what my mother called an easy baby. She slept through the night almost immediately, rarely cried, and seemed to smile constantly. I, apparently, had been colicky, demanding, and what my father often referred to as high maintenance during my infant years. Rebecca was such a difficult baby, my mother would tell friends and family members, usually while Emma sat contentedly on her lap. We didn't sleep for months. But Emma? Emma was a gift from heaven. She just made everything easier. These comparisons became the soundtrack of my childhood. While other families might have celebrated their children's different personalities and strengths, the Mitchell household operated on a ranking system where Emma consistently held the top spot. The favoritism wasn't always obvious to outsiders. My parents weren't neglectful or abusive in any traditional sense. I was fed, clothed, housed, and educated just like Emma. We both took piano lessons, participated in after-school activities, and received Christmas presents under the tree. But the quality of attention, the enthusiasm behind the support, and the benefit of the doubt in difficult situations, these things were distributed unequally, and I felt that inequality in my bones from an early age. When Emma started walking at 10 months, my parents threw a celebration dinner and called both sets of grandparents to share the news. When I had taken my first steps at 13 months, it was noted and forgotten. When Emma spoke her first word, Mama, at 11 months, my mother cried tears of joy and immediately started a baby book to document every milestone. My baby book, I later discovered, had exactly 3 entries before being abandoned in a drawer. School became another arena where the differences between us were magnified. Emma was naturally artistic and charismatic, the kind of child who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of positive attention. She excelled in drama class, won art contests, and seemed to make friends effortlessly. Teachers loved her, parents of other children always commented on how delightful she was, and she moved through elementary school collecting awards and accolades like they were Pokemon cards. I, on the other hand, was studious and serious-minded. I loved reading, excelled in mathematics and science, and preferred the company of books to large groups of children. While Emma was starring in school plays, I was winning academic competitions. While she was painting watercolor masterpieces that got displayed in the hallway, I was building complex science fair projects that earned me regional recognition. But in the Mitchell household, academic achievement seemed to carry less weight than social popularity and artistic talent. When Emma brought home a participation trophy from a local art contest, my parents displayed it prominently on the mantelpiece and took her out for ice cream to celebrate. When I brought home a first-place medal from the State Mathematics Olympiad, it was met with polite congratulations before being placed in a drawer with other school things. The pattern became so predictable that I started to anticipate it. Emma's accomplishments were celebrated, photographed, and shared with extended family. Mine were acknowledged briefly before the conversation moved on to more interesting topics. When report cards came home, Emma's B+ in art class generated more excitement than my straight A's in advanced placement courses. Emma is just so creative, my mother would beam to her book club friends. She has such natural talent, and she's so social. Everywhere we go, people just gravitate toward her. When asked about me during these same conversations, the response was typically more measured. Rebecca is very smart. She works very hard in school. The implication was clear. Emma had innate gifts, while I simply had to work harder to achieve anything noteworthy. The disparity extended beyond academics and extracurriculars into the fabric of daily family life. When we fought, as siblings inevitably do, I was usually the one expected to apologize first, regardless of who had started the conflict. When household chores needed to be divided, Emma's busy social calendar was always taken into consideration while my study time was seen as flexible. When family photos were taken, Emma was positioned front and center while I was arranged around her like a supporting player in her starring role. Birthdays became particularly painful illustrations of the favoritism. Emma's birthday parties were elaborate affairs with themes, professional decorations, and guest lists that seemed to include half her grade level. My parents would spend weeks planning every detail, from custom invitations to coordinated party favors. Emma's birthday was treated like a family holiday that deserved extensive preparation and celebration. My birthdays, while not ignored, were smaller, simpler affairs. The parties were nice enough, cake, presents, a few friends, but they lacked the enthusiasm and attention to detail that characterized Emma's celebrations. More telling was what happened in the weeks leading up to each birthday. Emma's was anticipated and planned with excitement, while mine seemed to creep up on my parents as an obligation they needed to fulfill. The gift-giving disparity was particularly stark. Emma consistently received the latest trendy items she had casually mentioned wanting: expensive art supplies, designer clothes, the newest technology. My gifts, while thoughtful, tended toward practical items like books, educational software, or clothes from department stores rather than boutiques. When I once mentioned wanting a particular art set I'd seen Emma admiring, I was told that those supplies were really more Emma's thing, and perhaps I'd prefer a new calculator for my advanced math classes. Christmas mornings became exercises in mathematical inequality that I couldn't help but calculate. The number of packages under the tree, the size of the gifts, the excitement with which they were wrapped and presented, all favored Emma by margins that became impossible to ignore. My parents seemed to shop for Emma with joy and anticipation, selecting items they knew would delight her. They shopped for me with duty and practicality, choosing things they thought I needed or could use. Even our physical appearances became subjects of comparison that reinforced the family hierarchy. Emma had inherited my mother's delicate features and natural blonde hair, along with my father's height and athletic build. She was conventionally beautiful in the way that made strangers comment positively, and photographers eager to capture her image. I had inherited a more mixed collection of family traits: my father's darker hair and serious eyes, my mother's shorter stature, and what my grandmother diplomatically called a more thoughtful countenance. I wasn't unattractive, but I wasn't the kind of child who prompted spontaneous compliments from strangers or requests to model for local advertisements, as Emma regularly received. Emma could be a model, my mother would say proudly when people commented on her appearance. When people made positive comments about my intelligence or academic achievements, the response was typically a modest acknowledgement rather than beaming pride. These seemingly small distinctions accumulated over years into a profound understanding of my place in the family hierarchy. I was valued for what I could accomplish through effort and determination. Emma was valued for simply existing as herself. I was the workhorse, she was the show horse. I was the supporting cast member in the ongoing production of the Mitchell family story, where Emma played the starring role. By the time I reached high school, this dynamic had become so ingrained that I stopped expecting it to change. I learned to find validation outside the family structure, from teachers who appreciated my academic dedication, from academic competitions where merit was measured objectively, and from the few close friends who valued my loyalty and reliability over charisma and social ease. But deep down, in the place where children keep their most fundamental needs and desires, I never stopped hoping that someday my parents would see me with the same pride and enthusiasm they reserved for Emma. I never stopped believing that if I just achieved enough, accomplished enough, or proved myself worthy enough, the balance would eventually shift in my favor. That hope would sustain me through years of coming second, and it would make what happened in our family lawyer's office all the more shocking when the truth finally emerged. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. High school graduation marked what I thought would be a turning point in the Mitchell family dynamics. For the first time in our lives, Emma and I would be pursuing separate paths, attending different colleges, and establishing our own identities away from the constant comparisons that had defined our childhood. I was naive enough to believe that physical distance might finally allow my parents to see me as an individual, rather than as Emma's less impressive older sister. I had earned a full academic scholarship to Northwestern University for their prestigious biomedical engineering program, achievement that required maintaining a 4.0 GPA throughout high school, while completing advanced placement courses in calculus, physics, and chemistry. The scholarship covered tuition, room, board, and even provided a stipend for research materials. It was the kind of opportunity that guidance counselors called life-changing, and other parents envied openly. Emma, meanwhile, had been accepted to Parsons School of Design in New York City for their fashion design program. Her portfolio was undeniably impressive, filled with sketches and designs that showed real creativity and technical skill. However, Parsons was an expensive private institution with no financial aid package, meaning my parents would need to pay approximately $60,000 per year for her education. The family meeting to discuss college finances revealed everything I needed to know about where priorities truly lay in the Mitchell household. My father spread financial documents across the dining room table with the precision of someone preparing for a corporate merger, while my mother sat beside him with a calculator and several college brochures. "Rebecca, your scholarship is wonderful," my father began, his tone suggesting this was both a compliment and a conclusion. "Northwestern is an excellent school, and the biomedical engineering program will set you up for a stable career in healthcare or medical technology." He paused, turning to Emma with an expression that softened noticeably. "Emma, your acceptance to Parsons is incredibly competitive. The fashion industry is challenging, but with your natural talent and the connections you'll make in New York, this could be the foundation for something really special." What followed was a detailed discussion of how my parents planned to restructure their finances to support Emma's expensive education. They would refinance the house, dip into retirement savings, and my father would take on additional clients to cover the costs. The enthusiasm in their voices as they planned this financial sacrifice was unmistakable. They were excited to invest in Emma's dreams, regardless of the cost. When I pointed out that my scholarship meant they could save over $200,000 compared to Emma's education costs, my mother's response was telling. "Oh, honey, we're so proud that you earned that scholarship. It just means we can focus our resources on helping Emma, since she doesn't have those same opportunities." The logic was circular and frustrating. Emma didn't have scholarship opportunities because she hadn't pursued the academic excellence that earned them. Yet somehow, this became a reason why she deserved more financial support, rather than recognition that I had worked harder to ease the family's financial burden. College itself provided a blessed respite from the constant comparisons, but it also illuminated just how skewed my perception of normal family relationships had become. My roommate Sarah came from a family with 3 daughters, and when she described their family dynamics during our late-night conversations, I realized how unusual my own experience had been. "My parents have different relationships with each of us," Sarah explained one evening as we studied for organic chemistry. "My older sister is the athlete, I'm the academic one. and my younger sister is the social butterfly. But my parents are equally proud of all of us. They brag about my GPA to their friends just as much as they brag about my sister's soccer championships. When I described my own family situation, Sarah's expression shifted from understanding to concern. Rebecca, that's not normal sibling rivalry. That sounds like your parents genuinely favor your sister over you. Have you ever talked to them about how that makes you feel? I had tried, on several occasions throughout high school, to address the inequality directly. These conversations typically followed the same pattern. I would carefully explain specific examples of different treatment. My parents would initially deny any favoritism, then gradually shift to justifying the differences as appropriate responses to our different personalities and needs. Emma is more sensitive, my mother would explain. She needs more encouragement and support. You've always been so independent and self-sufficient. Your sister has different strengths, my father would add. We parent each of you according to what you need to succeed. These explanations always left me feeling like my need for parental pride and enthusiasm was somehow a character flaw, evidence that I was too needy or demanding rather than proof that their treatment was unequal. During my sophomore year at Northwestern, I decided to major in biomedical engineering with a focus on prosthetics design. The field combined my love of mathematics and science with the possibility of creating devices that could genuinely improve people's lives. I was particularly interested in developing more affordable prosthetic limbs for children, inspired by a research paper about how quickly growing kids outgrew expensive devices their families couldn't afford to replace. When I called home to share my excitement about this career direction, my father's response was predictably measured. That sounds like meaningful work, Rebecca. Very practical. The same week, Emma called to tell our parents that she had been selected to assist a prominent fashion designer with New York Fashion Week preparations, an unpaid internship that was nevertheless a significant opportunity for a sophomore student. My parents' reaction was electric with enthusiasm. My mother immediately started planning a trip to New York to attend some of the shows, and my father began researching the designer to understand the significance of the opportunity. This could be Emma's big break, my mother gushed to everyone who would listen. She's always had such natural style, and now the right people are finally recognizing her talent. The contrast in their reactions crystallized something I had been struggling to articulate for years. My achievements were seen as the natural result of hard work and determination. Admirable but not particularly noteworthy. Emma's achievements were viewed as validation of her innate specialness, evidence that she was destined for greatness. Junior year brought what should have been my moment of undeniable triumph. I was selected for a prestigious summer research internship at the Mayo Clinic, working on a project to develop neural interface technology for advanced prosthetics. Only 12 undergraduate students nationwide were chosen for the program, and I was the youngest participant by nearly 2 years. The research involved cutting-edge work with brain-computer interfaces, allowing amputees to control prosthetic devices through thought alone. The technology was revolutionary, and being part of its development felt like contributing to the future of medical science. I was so excited about the opportunity that I drove home from college the weekend before the internship began, planning to share the news in person. I found my parents in the living room, surrounded by fabric samples and fashion magazines. Emma was home for spring break, and they were helping her plan her senior thesis project, a sustainable fashion line that would incorporate recycled materials into high-end designs. Mom, Dad, I began, barely containing my excitement. I have incredible news about this summer. Before I could continue, Emma looked up from a sketch she was working on. Oh, Rebecca's here. Perfect timing. I was just telling Mom and Dad about the fashion show we're planning for my thesis presentation. We're thinking about renting a gallery space in Soho for the show. The conversation immediately shifted to Emma's project. For the next hour, I listened as my parents enthusiastically discussed venue options, catering possibilities, and guest lists for Emma's thesis presentation. The show was still 6 months away, but they were already treating it like a major cultural event that required extensive planning and financial investment. When there was finally a pause in the conversation, I tried again to share my news about the Mayo Clinic internship. I explained the competitive selection process, the significance of the research, and what the experience could mean for my future career in biomedical engineering. My father nodded approvingly. That's excellent, Rebecca. Great resume builder for graduate school applications. my mother added. "You've always been so good at science. I'm sure you'll learn a lot." Then, almost immediately, the conversation returned to Emma's thesis project. They wanted to know about her inspiration for the sustainable fashion concept, whether she had connected with any environmental organizations that might support the project, and how they could help her network with people in the fashion industry who might attend her show. That evening, as I helped clear dinner dishes, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. "Emma's thesis project is so innovative," my mother was saying. "She's really going to make a statement in the fashion world. I think we should seriously consider helping her turn this into a real business after graduation." "Absolutely," my father agreed. "She has the vision and the talent. With the right support, she could build something significant." "And Rebecca will be fine," my mother continued. "She's so practical and hardworking. She'll find a good job after graduation and have a stable career. We don't need to worry about her the same way." I stood frozen in the doorway, holding a stack of plates, as the casual dismissal of my potential washed over me. In their minds, Emma was destined for greatness while I was destined for adequacy. Emma deserved investment and support because she might achieve something extraordinary. I deserved basic acknowledgement because I would achieve something ordinary. That conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with my family. I stopped calling home as frequently, stopped sharing details about my academic achievements, and stopped expecting enthusiasm for my accomplishments. If my parents viewed my success as inevitable and unremarkable, then there was no point in seeking their validation. The Mayo Clinic internship exceeded every expectation I had harbored. I worked alongside leading researchers, contributed to groundbreaking studies, and published my first academic paper as a co-author before my senior year began. The lead researcher, Dr. Martinez, became a mentor who helped me understand the broader implications of biomedical engineering research. "You have exceptional analytical skills and a rare ability to think systematically about complex problems," she told me during my final week. "Have you considered pursuing a PhD? The field needs researchers who can bridge the gap between engineering innovation and practical medical applications." When I shared this feedback with my parents, along with Dr. Martinez's offer to support my graduate school applications, their response followed the familiar pattern of polite acknowledgement without genuine excitement. "Graduate school is a big commitment," my father cautioned. "Are you sure you want to spend more years studying instead of starting your career?" Meanwhile, Emma's senior thesis fashion show had evolved into what my parents now called Emma's launch event. They had invested thousands of dollars in professional photography, marketing materials, and venue rental. They invited extended family friends, and business associates to attend what they positioned as the debut of an emerging fashion designer. The show itself was genuinely impressive. Emma had created a cohesive collection that demonstrated real artistic vision and technical skill. The sustainable fashion concept was thoughtfully executed, and the gallery presentation was professionally polished. She deserved recognition for her hard work and creativity. But watching my parents' faces during the show, radiant with pride, practically glowing as they introduced Emma to potential contacts and collaborators, I felt a profound sadness about what I had never experienced, and probably never would. They didn't just love Emma, they believed in her potential for greatness in a way they had never believed in mine. After graduation, I accepted a position with a medical device company in Boston, developing prosthetic technology for pediatric patients. The work was meaningful and challenging, exactly what I had hoped to do with my biomedical engineering degree. Emma moved back to New York to launch her sustainable fashion business with financial backing from our parents, who had taken out a second mortgage on the house to fund her startup costs. "This is Emma's moment," my mother explained when I questioned the wisdom of risking the family home for a new business venture. "Sometimes you have to take big risks to achieve big dreams." I wanted to point out that my career in biomedical engineering was also a big dream, one that I had pursued without requiring any financial risk from my parents. But I had learned that such observations were unwelcome in the Mitchell family narrative, where Emma's dreams were inherently more valuable than mine. While my parents' favoritism toward Emma had shaped most of my childhood and young adult experiences, There was one family member who seemed to operate by entirely different rules. My paternal grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell. From my earliest memories, Grandma Eleanor had treated Emma and me with a kind of fierce equality that stood in stark contrast to our parents' obvious preferences. Eleanor Mitchell was a formidable woman in her late 70s who had built a successful real estate empire from nothing after my grandfather's death 30 years earlier. She owned commercial properties throughout Connecticut and southern New York, managed her investments with shrewd precision, and had never remarried despite numerous suitors over the decades. Where my parents saw Emma's artistic temperament as charming and my academic focus as admirable but unremarkable, Grandma Eleanor seemed to evaluate us based on entirely different criteria. Character isn't measured by how easily things come to you, she told me once during a private conversation when I was visiting her sprawling colonial home in Greenwich. It's measured by what you do when things get difficult, and how you treat people who can't do anything for you in return. I was 26 at the time, 2 years into my career with Boston Medical Devices, when Grandma Eleanor began inviting me for monthly weekend visits that didn't include the rest of the family. These invitations initially surprised me, as family gatherings had always been group affairs centered around Emma's latest projects or achievements. But Eleanor was direct about her intentions. "I want to know my granddaughter," she said during that first solo visit, "not the version of you that your parents have decided to see." These monthly visits became a sanctuary, where I could share my professional accomplishments, personal challenges, and future aspirations, without feeling like I was competing for attention or validation. Eleanor listened with genuine interest as I described my work developing adaptive prosthetics for children, asked thoughtful questions about the technical challenges I was solving, and celebrated my successes with an enthusiasm that I had rarely experienced within my immediate family. During one particularly memorable visit, I brought along prototypes of a new pediatric prosthetic hand that I had been developing. The device incorporated advanced grip sensors and could be controlled through muscle contractions, allowing children to perform delicate tasks that had previously been impossible with existing technology. Eleanor examined the prototype with fascination, asking detailed questions about how it worked and what it meant for the children who would use it. "This isn't just engineering," she said finally. "This is giving kids their childhoods back. Your parents talk about Emma's fashion shows like they're changing the world, but Rebecca, you're literally changing lives." The validation was so unexpected and powerful that I found myself crying in her living room, overwhelmed by the recognition I had craved for so many years. Eleanor didn't offer empty comfort or try to minimize my emotional response. Instead, she made tea and shared stories about her own experiences being undervalued by family members who couldn't see past their own assumptions. "Your great-grandfather thought women had no business running companies," she told me. "He left everything to your grandfather's brothers when he died, assuming I would just be taken care of by someone else. Instead, I used my savings to buy my first rental property and built everything from there. Sometimes the people who doubt you end up being your greatest motivation." As our relationship deepened, Eleanor began sharing details about the family dynamics that had puzzled me for years. She had observed the preferential treatment Emma received, and it concerned her deeply, not just because of the impact on me, but because of what she saw happening to Emma herself. "Your sister is talented," Eleanor said carefully during one of our conversations, "but your parents are doing her no favors by protecting her from disappointment and failure. Emma has never had to develop resilience or self-reliance, because everything has always been smoothed over for her. That's going to create problems eventually." Eleanor's concerns proved prophetic. Emma's sustainable fashion business, launched with such fanfare and financial backing from our parents, struggled from the beginning. The fashion industry was brutally competitive, and Emma discovered that natural talent and family support weren't sufficient to navigate the complex realities of running a business. The problems started small: shipping delays, quality control issues with manufacturers, and difficulty building a customer base beyond family friends and initial supporters. Emma had expected her thesis collection's success to translate automatically into commercial viability, but the transition from student project to profitable business proved far more challenging than anyone had anticipated. My parents responded to these early setbacks by increasing their involvement and financial investment. When Emma's initial inventory didn't sell as quickly as projected, they funded a marketing campaign featuring professional photography and social media advertising. When manufacturing costs exceeded budget projections, they covered the overages without requiring Emma to adjust her business model or pricing structure. "She just needs time to find her footing," my mother explained when I visited home for Thanksgiving that year. "The fashion industry is so competitive, and Emma is still learning the business side of things." Meanwhile, my own career was advancing steadily, without any family fanfare or financial support. I had been promoted to senior engineer and was leading a team developing next-generation prosthetic interfaces for spinal cord injury patients. The work required extensive collaboration with medical professionals, regulatory specialists, and patient advocacy groups, skills in project management and leadership that I was developing through direct experience and professional challenge. When I mentioned my promotion during the same Thanksgiving visit, my father's response was characteristic. "That's great, Rebecca. You've always been so dependable at work." The contrast between their reactions to Emma's struggles and my successes was so stark that I began to wonder if my parents were even capable of seeing me as anything other than the self-sufficient daughter who didn't require their attention or investment. Eleanor, however, was paying close attention to both of our trajectories. During our December visit, she asked pointed questions about Emma's business challenges, and my parents' continued financial support. "How much have they invested total?" she asked, reviewing some business documents that Emma had left at her house during a recent family dinner. "I think it's close to $200,000 now," I said, "between the initial startup costs, the marketing campaigns, and covering the operating losses each month." Eleanor's expression darkened. "That's more than they spent on both of your college educations combined. And what does Emma have to show for it?" The question was rhetorical, but the answer was troubling. After 18 months in business, Emma's company was hemorrhaging money with no clear path to profitability. She had refused to consider scaling back her operations, adjusting her pricing, or finding a business partner with more experience, because she viewed any of these suggestions as compromises to her artistic vision. "Your parents aren't helping her by continuing to bail her out," Eleanor said bluntly. "They're enabling her to avoid making the hard decisions that might actually save her business." Around this time, I began to notice subtle changes in Eleanor's behavior during family gatherings. She asked more direct questions about Emma's business metrics, challenged some of my parents' more optimistic assessments of the company's prospects, and began making pointed comments about the importance of financial responsibility and realistic planning. During our spring family Easter dinner, the tension came to a head when Emma announced that she needed another $50,000 to fund a new collection that would turn everything around for her struggling business. "Emma has some brilliant new designs," my mother said enthusiastically, "and she's found a manufacturer who can produce them at a better price point. This could be exactly what the business needs to become profitable." Eleanor listened to the pitch with an expression that grew increasingly skeptical. Finally, she set down her fork and addressed Emma directly. "What happens if this collection doesn't perform better than your previous ones?" she asked. "Do you have a backup plan? Have you analyzed why your current inventory isn't selling? What specific changes are you making beyond just producing more products?" Emma's response revealed the fundamental disconnect between her artistic ambitions and business realities. She talked about creative inspiration, new design concepts, and her confidence that this collection would resonate better with customers, but she couldn't provide concrete data about market research, customer feedback, or competitive analysis. My parents rushed to fill the silence with reassurances about Emma's talent and the temporary nature of her business challenges, but Eleanor's questions had exposed the lack of substantive planning behind the latest funding request. "I think Emma would benefit from working with a business mentor," Eleanor suggested. "Someone in the fashion industry who could help her develop more realistic strategies for building a sustainable company." The suggestion was met with immediate resistance from both Emma and my parents, who viewed it as an implication that Emma wasn't capable of running her own business. "Emma just needs more time and support," my father said defensively. "Every business goes through growing pains." Eleanor's response was measured but firm. "Some businesses go through growing pains and emerge stronger. Others continue struggling because they're built on unrealistic foundations. The difference is usually whether the owners are willing to face hard truths and make difficult changes." The conversation ended uncomfortably, with my parents and Emma clearly feeling criticized, and Eleanor appearing frustrated by their refusal to acknowledge the obvious problems with the business model. That evening, as I helped Eleanor clear the dinner dishes, she shared her growing concerns about the family dynamics that were being reinforced by Emma's business situation. "Your parents are so invested in Emma's success that they can't see how they're setting her up for a much bigger failure down the road," she said. "And they're so focused on protecting her from disappointment that they're completely missing your remarkable achievements." She paused, looking at me with an expression that combined sadness and determination. "That's gonna change, Rebecca, I promise you that." At the time, I assumed she was referring to her plans to speak more directly with my parents about their treatment of both Emma and me. I had no idea that Eleanor was already developing a much more comprehensive strategy to address the family inequities that had shaped our relationships for decades. Over the following months, Eleanor began asking me detailed questions about my career goals, my financial situation, and my plans for the future. She wanted to know about my student loan balances, my savings goals, and whether I had considered pursuing additional education or starting my own biomedical engineering consulting firm. These conversations felt different from our usual discussions about work and family. Eleanor was gathering information with a purpose that she wasn't yet ready to reveal, and her questions suggested she was thinking strategically about something larger than our monthly visits. Meanwhile, Emma's business continued its downward spiral despite the additional investment from our parents. The new collection failed to generate significant sales. Manufacturing problems created quality issues that damaged the company's reputation, and Emma found herself overwhelmed by the operational demands of running a struggling business. By late fall, it became clear that the business would need to be dissolved or sold to prevent total financial catastrophe for the family. My parents had invested their retirement savings, refinanced their home twice, and exhausted their available credit to support Emma's venture. The failure was devastating for everyone involved, but particularly for Emma, who had never experienced significant disappointment or setback before. She moved back into our parents' house, struggling with depression and uncertainty about her future direction. During this crisis, Eleanor's behavior became even more pointed and purposeful. She offered emotional support to Emma but refused to provide financial assistance for any new business ventures. She encouraged my parents to seek financial counseling to address the damage to their retirement planning. And she began making cryptic comments about learning from mistakes and understanding the real value of different kinds of success. "Some lessons," she told me during one of our December visits, "can only be taught through consequences. And some gifts can only be appreciated when they're received by people who truly understand their value." The months following Emma's business collapse brought a strange shift in the family dynamics that I couldn't quite understand at the time. While my parents focused on helping Emma recover from her entrepreneurial disappointment and managing their own financial crisis, Grandma Eleanor began what I can only describe now as a systematic documentation project that would prove crucial to everything that happened later. It started innocuously enough. During our monthly visits, Eleanor began asking me to bring copies of my academic transcripts, professional certifications, and work evaluations. She said she wanted to create a family archive of important documents and achievements, and she was starting with my generation before moving on to older family records. "I've been thinking about legacy," she explained one Saturday afternoon as we organized my undergraduate awards and graduate school acceptance letters in her home office. "Your grandfather always said that families forget their own history too easily. Important accomplishments get lost, and people only remember the stories that get told repeatedly." The request seemed reasonable, even touching. Eleanor had always been meticulous about record-keeping for her business empire, so extending that organizational approach to family history made sense. I gathered everything she asked for: scholarship notifications, research publications, professional awards, performance reviews, and even copies of patents I had contributed to during my work in biomedical engineering. What I didn't realize until much later was that Eleanor was simultaneously conducting a parallel documentation process with Emma, my parents, and even some extended family members. She was collecting financial records, business documents, and what she diplomatically called, quote, correspondence, that painted a comprehensive picture of how family resources and support had been distributed over the years. During one particularly memorable visit in February, Eleanor showed me her home office filing system, dozens of meticulously labeled folders containing what appeared to be decades of family-related documents. The organization was impressive but also somewhat overwhelming in its scope and detail. "I've always believed that the truth reveals itself when you look at patterns over time," she said, running her finger along the folder labels. "Individual incidents can be explained away or rationalized, but patterns tell stories that are much harder to dismiss." While Eleanor conducted her mysterious documentation project, the aftermath of Emma's business failure continued to reshape our family relationships in unexpected ways. My parents, facing serious financial strain for the first time in their adult lives, began expressing frustrations and resentments that had previously been hidden beneath their protective support of Emma's endeavors. The stress manifested in small but telling ways during family gatherings. My father, who had always been patient and encouraging with Emma's creative projects, became visibly tense when she mentioned new business ideas or artistic pursuits. My mother, who had enthusiastically supported every aspect of Emma's fashion venture, now seemed exhausted by conversations about Emma's future plans. "Maybe it's time to consider more traditional career options," my father suggested during a particularly awkward family dinner. "Fashion design is a very difficult industry to break into successfully." Emma's response to these subtle shifts in family support was to become increasingly defensive and emotional. She had never experienced sustained disappointment before, and she struggled to process both the business failure and her parents' growing reluctance to fund additional creative ventures. "You supported me when you thought I was going to be successful," she accused during one heated family discussion. "Now that things got difficult, you're ready to give up on my dreams entirely." The accusation wasn't entirely fair. My parents had supported Emma far longer and more extensively than most parents would have, but it revealed how unprepared she was to handle adversity or criticism. Years of being protected from consequences had left her without the resilience necessary to recover from significant setbacks. Meanwhile, my own career continued to advance in ways that should have been celebration-worthy but received minimal family attention. I had been selected to lead a groundbreaking research project developing neural interface technology for paralyzed patients, a position that came with both substantial responsibility and recognition within the biomedical engineering community. The project involved collaborating with neurosurgeons, physical therapists, and patients themselves to create devices that could translate neural signals into movement commands for robotic assistance systems. The potential impact was enormous. We were essentially working to restore mobility and independence to people who had lost hope of ever regaining those capabilities. When I tried to share my excitement about this opportunity during a family visit, the conversation quickly shifted to Emma's job search and my parents' concerns about her emotional state following the business closure. My groundbreaking research project was acknowledged with polite interest before being overshadowed by extended discussion of Emma's interview for a position as a design assistant at a small boutique firm. The disparity in attention and enthusiasm was so pronounced that I began to feel like an outsider in my own family gatherings. I was there to provide stability and normalcy, while the real emotional energy was reserved for Emma's challenges and needs. Eleanor, however, was paying close attention to these family dynamics, and her questions during our private visits became increasingly pointed and specific. "How did your parents react when you told them about the neural interface project?" she asked during our March visit. "They said it sounded interesting and asked how long the project timeline was," I replied, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. And when Emma told them about her job interview, they spent an hour discussing interview strategies, helped her choose an outfit, and my mother drove into the city with her for moral support. Eleanor made notes in a small leather journal that she had started bringing to our conversations. At the time, I assumed she was simply keeping track of family news and updates, but her question suggested she was analyzing the information more systematically. "Rebecca," she said carefully, "I want you to understand something important. Your parents' inability to recognize your achievements isn't a reflection of your worth or the significance of what you're accomplishing. It's a reflection of their own limitations and blind spots." The validation was comforting, but I was beginning to sense that Eleanor's support came with some larger purpose that she wasn't yet ready to reveal. Around this time, I began to notice changes in Eleanor's interactions with the broader family. She became more direct in her observations about family dynamics. less willing to smooth over awkward moments, and increasingly vocal about what she saw as problematic patterns in how my parents approached parenting and support. During our annual family Easter gathering, the tensions that had been building for months came to a dramatic head. Emma had been unemployed for several months following her business closure, and my parents were pressuring her to accept a design assistant position that she felt was beneath her qualifications and artistic vision. "It's a good company with opportunities for advancement," my father argued. "You need to start somewhere and prove yourself in a traditional business environment." "I'm not a traditional employee," Emma shot back. "I'm an entrepreneur and an artist. Taking some entry-level job feels like giving up on everything I've worked toward." The argument escalated quickly, with my parents expressing frustrations about Emma's unrealistic expectations and Emma feeling betrayed by their lack of continued support for her creative ambitions. "We've supported your dreams for years," my mother said, her voice rising with uncharacteristic sharpness. "We've invested our savings, our retirement funds, and our credit to help you pursue fashion design. At some point, you need to take responsibility for supporting yourself." Emma burst into tears and fled to the bathroom, leaving the rest of us sitting in uncomfortable silence around the dining table. Eleanor, who had observed this exchange with growing displeasure, finally spoke into the quiet. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen," she said, her voice carrying an authority that commanded attention. "You've created a situation where Emma never learned to handle disappointment or develop realistic expectations, and now you're all paying the price for that approach." My father bristled at the criticism. "Mom, we've done our best to support both our daughters according to their individual needs and personalities." "No," Eleanor replied firmly. "You've done your best to support one daughter while taking the other for granted. And the results speak for themselves." She turned to look at me with an expression that was both apologetic and determined. "Rebecca has built a successful career in a demanding field, contributes to medical research that saves lives, manages her finances responsibly, and has never asked you for significant support or assistance. Instead of celebrating those achievements, you treat them as evidence that she doesn't need your attention or investment." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge that demanded response. "We're proud of Rebecca," my mother said defensively. "She's always been so capable and independent." "Being capable and independent doesn't mean she doesn't deserve recognition, enthusiasm, and investment," Eleanor countered. "You've spent more money on Emma's failed business than you ever spent celebrating Rebecca's genuine successes." The conversation was interrupted by Emma's return from the bathroom, her eyes red from crying and her expression defensive. "I didn't realize this family gathering was going to turn into an evaluation of my life choices," she said, resuming her seat with visible tension. Eleanor's expression softened slightly as she looked at Emma. "This isn't about evaluating your choices, Emma. It's about understanding how family dynamics affect everyone involved. You deserved support and encouragement, but you also deserved the chance to develop resilience and realistic expectations about how the world works." She paused, her gaze shifting between my parents and Emma. "And Rebecca deserved the same level of enthusiasm and investment that you provided to Emma, regardless of whether she seemed to need it or not." The evening ended with strained politeness and unresolved tensions that would only intensify in the months that followed. But Eleanor's willingness to directly challenge the family narrative marked a turning point in the relationships that had shaped our lives for decades. As we prepared to leave that evening, Eleanor pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that I'm working on something that will address these issues more comprehensively," she said cryptically. "It's going to take some time to put everything in place, but I believe it's important for this family to confront the truth about how these dynamics have affected everyone involved." I had no idea what she meant by working on something, but her tone suggested that whatever she was planning would have significant implications for all of us. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's documentation project intensified. She requested copies of family financial records from my parents, claiming she needed them for estate planning purposes. She asked Emma to provide detailed records of the business investments and expenditures from her fashion venture. She even contacted my undergraduate academic advisor to request copies of recommendation letters and academic honors that I had received during college. "I'm creating a comprehensive family archive," she explained when my mother questioned the extensive document requests. "It's important to have complete records for estate planning and tax purposes. The explanation satisfied my parents, who trusted Eleanor's business acumen and assumed her document gathering was related to standard estate management practices. They had no reason to suspect that she was building something far more consequential than a simple family archive. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late September, while I was reviewing patient data for our neural interface clinical trials. My mother's voice was shaky with panic as she delivered news that would reshape everything I thought I understood about our family dynamics. "Rebecca, you need to come home immediately. Your grandmother collapsed this morning and she's in the hospital. The doctors say it was a massive stroke." The 2-hour drive from Boston to Greenwich felt endless as I processed the implications of Eleanor's sudden medical emergency. At 78, she had been remarkably healthy and active, managing her real estate portfolio with the same sharp intelligence that had characterized her entire adult life. The idea of her lying unconscious in a hospital bed seemed impossible to reconcile with the formidable woman who had been my emotional anchor for the past several years. I arrived at Greenwich Hospital to find my parents, and Emma clustered around a waiting room television, their faces reflecting the helpless anxiety that accompanies medical crises. The initial reports from Eleanor's medical team were cautiously optimistic. The stroke had been severe, but she had received treatment quickly enough to prevent the worst-case scenarios. "She's stable now," Dr. Patterson, the attending neurologist, explained during our first family meeting. "The next 48 hours will be critical for determining the extent of any permanent damage. Strokes affect different patients in various ways, but your mother is remarkably strong for her age." What followed were 3 of the longest days of my life, spent rotating between Eleanor's bedside and the hospital waiting room while we monitored her condition and prayed for signs of improvement. She remained unconscious for the first 36 hours, hooked to machines that tracked her vital signs and brain activity with mechanical precision. During those vigil hours, something unexpected happened within our family dynamics. The crisis temporarily suspended the usual patterns of favoritism and competition as we focused entirely on Eleanor's recovery. My parents showed genuine appreciation for my ability to communicate with medical staff and understand treatment protocols, while Emma provided emotional comfort that helped all of us cope with the uncertainty. "I don't know what we would do without both of you here," my mother said on the second evening, her voice heavy with exhaustion and fear. "Rebecca, you've been so helpful with the doctors, and Emma, you've kept us all calm." It was perhaps the first time in my adult life that my parents had acknowledged my contributions, without comparing them to Emma's or minimizing their significance. The recognition felt bittersweet, given the circumstances that had prompted it. Eleanor regained consciousness on Thursday morning, initially confused and disoriented but gradually becoming more alert as the hours passed. Her speech was slightly slurred, and her left arm showed some weakness, but her cognitive function appeared largely intact, an outcome that Dr. Patterson described as remarkably positive given the severity of the stroke. "I need to talk to Rebecca," were among Eleanor's first coherent words after waking up, spoken with an urgency that surprised the medical staff and family members present. "Grandma, we're all here," Emma said gently. "Everyone came as soon as we heard." Eleanor's eyes found mine across the hospital room with an intensity that seemed to cut through the fog of medication and medical equipment. "Rebecca, I need to talk to you privately. It's important." The request puzzled my parents, but they attributed it to post-stroke confusion and the disorientation that often accompanies major medical events. They assumed Eleanor would want to speak with all of us once she was feeling stronger. But Eleanor's insistence on privacy wasn't confusion. It was urgency born from her awareness that strokes can be unpredictable, and that she might not have unlimited time to address the issues she had been methodically preparing to confront. When the nurses finally allowed brief private visits, Eleanor gripped my hand with surprising strength and spoke in a whisper that was both weak and determined. "The documents," she said, her words careful but clear. "Everything is in my home office. Top drawer of the mahogany desk. Locked. The key is in the small jewelry box on my dresser." "Grandma, you need to focus on recovering," I said, trying to soothe what I assumed was anxiety about business matters. "Your properties and investments can wait until you're feeling better." "Not business," she replied firmly. "Family. The truth about this family that needs to be told." Her grip tightened on my hand. "Promise me you'll get those documents if something happens to me. Promise me you'll make sure everyone sees what I've documented." The intensity in her voice convinced me that she wasn't speaking from medical disorientation but from a deep sense of purpose that had survived her stroke intact. "I promise," I said, though I had no idea what I was agreeing to uncover. Eleanor's recovery progressed steadily over the following weeks, but the stroke had left her significantly weakened. She required assistance with daily activities and could no longer manage the demanding schedule that had characterized her oversight of her business empire. The realization that her independence had been permanently compromised was devastating for someone who had spent decades building and controlling her own financial destiny. During her rehabilitation period, Eleanor moved temporarily into my parents' house, where she could receive the care and supervision that her condition required. The arrangement was supposed to be short-term, just until she regained enough strength to return to her own home with hired assistance. But having Eleanor as a daily presence in my parents' house created new tensions and observations that she seemed to catalog with the same systematic attention she had always applied to business analysis. "Your parents treat you like hired help," she told me during one of my visits, her speech still slightly affected by the stroke but her observations as sharp as ever. "You drive down from Boston every weekend to help with my care, you coordinate with my doctors, you manage my medication schedule, but they take your assistance for granted while praising Emma for stopping by twice a week to keep me company." The observation was accurate, but painful to acknowledge. I had naturally assumed primary responsibility for Eleanor's medical care coordination because of my background in biomedical engineering and my comfort with healthcare systems. My parents appreciated my help but seemed to view it as an extension of my competent, reliable personality rather than as extraordinary effort that deserved special recognition. Meanwhile, Emma's visits were treated as generous gifts that brightened Eleanor's recovery. She brought flowers, played music, and provided cheerful conversation that undoubtedly contributed to Eleanor's emotional well-being. But the practical demands of medical care, managing appointments, communicating with healthcare providers, and monitoring recovery progress, fell primarily to me. "This is exactly the pattern I've been documenting," Eleanor said during another private conversation. "Your contributions are expected and taken for granted. Emma's contributions are appreciated and celebrated. The disparity is so consistent that I don't think your parents even recognize it anymore." As Eleanor's condition stabilized, she began pressing me about the documents she had mentioned during our hospital conversation. She wanted to know if I had retrieved them from her house, and she seemed anxious about ensuring their security and eventual disclosure. "I haven't been to your house yet," I admitted. "I've been focusing on helping with your recovery, and I assumed those documents could wait until you were ready to handle them yourself." Eleanor's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, those documents represent years of careful documentation about this family's patterns of behavior, financial decisions, and treatment of both you and Emma. They're not business records that can wait indefinitely." She paused, struggling slightly with the words affected by her stroke. "I may not have much time left to address these issues directly. The stroke was a warning that I can't ignore. I need you to understand what I've compiled and why it's important." The following weekend, I drove to Eleanor's Greenwich house for the first time since her stroke. The colonial mansion felt eerily quiet without her commanding presence, and I moved through the familiar rooms with a sense of trespassing, despite having her explicit permission to access her private documents. Eleanor's home office was exactly as she had described, meticulously organized with decades of business records, investment portfolios, and legal documents arranged in clearly labeled filing systems. The mahogany desk dominated the room, its top drawer secured with an old-fashioned lock that seemed designed for important documents rather than casual storage. I found the key in her jewelry box, exactly where she had indicated, hidden beneath vintage brooches and pearl necklaces that I remembered her wearing during my childhood. The weight of the small brass key felt disproportionate to its size, as if it held significance beyond its simple mechanical function. The locked drawer contained 3 thick manila folders, each labeled with neat handwriting that I recognized as Eleanor's distinctive script. The labels read, "Rebecca, Academic and Professional Documentation," "Emma, Business and Financial Support Records," and "Family, Comparative Analysis and Observations." I sat in Eleanor's leather office chair and opened the first folder with hands that trembled slightly from anticipation and apprehension. What I found inside would change my understanding of my family's history and my place within it, more dramatically than I could have imagined. The Rebecca folder contained copies of every academic award, scholarship notification, and professional recognition I had received from elementary school through my current position. But more than just collecting these documents, Eleanor had organized them chronologically and annotated them with notes about my parents' reactions, or lack thereof, to each achievement. Next to my National Merit Scholarship notification, she had written, "Parents mentioned briefly at dinner," immediately shifted conversation to Emma's lead role in school play. Beside my college graduation summa cum laude certificate. No family celebration planned. Parents attended ceremony but left immediately after for Emma's art gallery opening. The annotations continued through my professional achievements, each success documented alongside Eleanor's observations about how my family had responded to the news. The pattern that emerged was devastating in its consistency. Years of academic and professional excellence met with polite acknowledgement, while Emma's far more modest achievements received enthusiastic celebration and family-wide recognition. But the most shocking discovery was a series of photographs that Eleanor had apparently taken during family gatherings over the years. These weren't casual family snapshots but deliberate documentation of family dynamics in action. Photos of my parents' faces during conversations about Emma's projects versus their expressions during discussions of my work. Images of gift distributions during birthdays and holidays that clearly showed the disparity in enthusiasm and investment. And even pictures of family photo arrangements that consistently positioned Emma as the central figure while relegating me to supporting positions. The visual evidence was more powerful than any written description could have been, showing patterns that had been invisible to me because they were so embedded in our normal family interactions. As I moved through Eleanor's documentation, I began to understand that her mysterious project had been far more comprehensive and purposeful than I had ever imagined. She hadn't just been collecting family records. She had been building a legal case that would force our family to confront truths that had been hidden behind decades of rationalization and denial. The second folder in Eleanor's locked drawer bore Emma's name, and opening it felt like stepping into an alternate universe, where every family financial decision of the past decade had been meticulously tracked, analyzed, and documented with the precision of a forensic accountant. Eleanor hadn't just collected receipts and bank statements. She had created what could only be described as a comprehensive financial audit of how my parents had allocated resources between Emma and me since we turned 18. The level of detail was staggering and, frankly, somewhat unsettling in its thoroughness. The folder began with a handwritten cover letter dated just 3 months before Eleanor's stroke, addressed to my family in her distinctive script. The following documentation represents a factual analysis of financial support, gifts, and investments made by David and Catherine Mitchell on behalf of their daughters Emma and Rebecca between 2018 and 2024. These records have been compiled from bank statements, tax returns, loan documents, and receipts that were provided to me for estate planning purposes. The purpose of this analysis is not to create conflict, but to illuminate patterns that may not be visible to those closest to the situation. What followed was a year-by-year breakdown that read like a corporate financial report, complete with charts, graphs, and comparative analyses that painted a picture of resource allocation so one-sided that it would have been comical if it weren't so personally devastating. The 2018 section, corresponding to our college graduation year, showed that my parents had spent $847 on my graduation celebration, including dinner for 6 at a mid-range restaurant and a modest gift of professional business attire. For Emma's graduation from Parsons, the expenditures totaled $4,293, including a catered party for 40 guests, professional photography, a designer watch, and a trip to Europe as a quote to inspire her artistic development. Eleanor had attached copies of credit card statements, hotel reservations, and even the invitation for Emma's graduation party, which had been professionally printed on heavy cardstock with custom design elements. My graduation dinner receipt was stapled to a handwritten note. Rebecca's celebration, family dinner at Olive Garden, gift of 2 business suits from Macy's. Total cost less than Emma's graduation watch alone. The business investment section was even more stark in its documentation. Eleanor had obtained copies of loan applications, bank transfers, and business incorporation documents that showed the complete financial trail of my parents' support for Emma's fashion venture. Eleanor had annotated each major expenditure with contextual notes that revealed the decision-making process behind these investments. Next to the $25,000 marketing campaign expense, she had written, David and Catherine refinanced home to fund professional photo shoot and New York Fashion Week booth rental. Emma, age 23, no business experience. But perhaps the most damaging evidence in Emma's folder was a section Eleanor had titled Opportunity Costs and Alternative Investments. Here, she had documented my own financial milestones and calculated what kind of support my parents could have provided if they had been equally committed to investing in my success. Eleanor had calculated that if my parents had provided me with even half the financial support they gave Emma, I could have purchased a larger home, invested in advanced graduate education, or started my own biomedical engineering consulting firm years earlier than I would be able to do independently. Rebecca has demonstrated exceptional financial responsibility and independence, Eleanor had written in the margins. The lack of family investment in her success is not because she doesn't need support, it's because she has never asked for it and has proven capable of succeeding without it. This has allowed David and Catherine to concentrate their resources on Emma, without considering the opportunity cost to Rebecca's potential advancement. The gift-giving analysis was equally systematic and painful to review. Eleanor had tracked birthday and Christmas presents for both Emma and me over a 6-year period, documenting not just the monetary value but also the thought and effort that went into selection and presentation. Emma's gifts consistently showed higher financial investment and more personal consideration. For her 25th birthday, my parents had given her a $3,000 professional camera and lens kit after she mentioned an interest in photography as a potential complement to her fashion design work. For my 25th birthday, they had given me a $200 gift certificate to a kitchen supply store because I had casually mentioned enjoying cooking as a stress reliever after long days at work. But Eleanor's analysis went beyond simple dollar amounts to examine the research and planning that went into gift selection. Emma's presents were clearly chosen based on her current interests and future aspirations. Art supplies when she was in school, business books when she launched her company, expensive skincare products when she mentioned wanting to look professional for client meetings. My gifts, while thoughtful in their own way, tended toward practical items that reflected my responsible, self-sufficient personality rather than my dreams or aspirations. I received organizational supplies, kitchen appliances, and professional clothing. Useful gifts that suggested my parents saw me as someone who needed tools for the life I was already living, rather than inspiration for the life I might want to build. The vacation and travel section revealed another dimension of differential treatment that I had never fully recognized. Eleanor had documented family trips, individual travel support, and even visits home during holidays with the meticulousness of a travel agent. When Emma had wanted to study abroad during her junior year at Parsons, my parents had paid for a month-long fashion study tour through Italy and France, costing $8,000 beyond her regular tuition. When I had been invited to present my research at an international biomedical engineering conference in Switzerland, I had paid my own way because I assumed my parents would view it as a professional expense rather than something they should support. The documentation showed that my assumption had been correct, but it also showed how my self-reliance had inadvertently enabled my parents to focus their travel and experience investments entirely on Emma. Over 6 years, they had funded Emma's study abroad program, 2 vacation trips to New York for fashion industry networking, and multiple weekend trips to visit her during college. My visits home had been at my own expense, and my professional travel had never been discussed as something the family might support. Eleanor's analysis extended to holiday celebrations and family milestone events, revealing patterns that were both subtle and systematic. Emma's achievements were commemorated with family gatherings, special dinners, and often included extended family members who were invited to celebrate her successes. When Emma had been featured in a small fashion blog article about emerging designers, my parents had organized a family barbecue and invited aunts, uncles, and cousins to celebrate the recognition. When I had been quoted in a major medical journal about breakthrough prosthetic technology research, the achievement was mentioned briefly during a regular family dinner, and then the conversation moved on to other topics. The third section of Emma's folder contained what Eleanor labeled emotional labor documentation, perhaps the most sophisticated and heartbreaking analysis of all. Here, she had tracked the time, energy, and emotional investment that my parents put into supporting Emma's various endeavors, compared to their engagement with my professional development and personal life. Eleanor had documented phone call frequency, length of visits, and even the content focus of family conversations during gatherings. The pattern that emerged showed my parents investing significantly more emotional energy in Emma's problems, projects, and daily life experiences. When Emma had struggled with business challenges, my parents had spent hours helping her strategize solutions, research industry trends, and connect with potential mentors. When I had faced professional challenges or career decisions, I had typically worked through them independently because I had learned that bringing problems to family conversations often resulted in brief advice sessions before attention shifted to more immediate concerns. But perhaps the most devastating evidence in this section was a series of email exchanges that Eleanor had apparently requested copies of from my parents during her document gathering phase. These emails, sent between my mother and father during various family situations, revealed their private thoughts about both Emma and me in ways that were more honest than their direct communications had ever been. In one exchange from 2 years earlier, my mother had written, "Emma called again about the business cash flow problems. I know we've already helped so much, but she sounds really stressed. Maybe we could transfer another $10,000 from savings? She's worked so hard on this." My father's response had been, "I agree. Emma needs our support right now, and the business is still viable with the right backing. Rebecca is doing fine on her own. She never asks for help and seems to have everything under control. We can focus on Emma for now." Reading those emails felt like discovering that your family had been holding secret meetings about your life, where you were consistently voted least in need of attention or investment. The casual dismissal of my independence as evidence that I didn't deserve support was particularly painful, because it revealed how thoroughly my self-reliance had backfired as a strategy for earning parental recognition. Another email exchange from around Emma's birthday the previous year showed my mother writing, "I found the perfect gift for Emma, that jewelry-making kit she mentioned wanting. It's expensive, but she's been so down about the business stuff. What should we get Rebecca? She's impossible to shop for because she never seems to want anything." The characterization of me as impossible to shop for stung, because it revealed how little effort my parents put into understanding my interests, aspirations, or desires beyond my professional responsibilities. I had interests and dreams, but I had learned not to share them because they were typically met with polite disinterest rather than genuine enthusiasm. As I read through Eleanor's comprehensive analysis of our family's financial and emotional resource allocation, I began to understand why she had spent years documenting these patterns with such systematic precision. The evidence was so extensive and well organized that it would be impossible for anyone to dismiss it as selective memory, bias, or misunderstanding. Eleanor had built an irrefutable case that my parents had consistently chosen to invest their time, money, and emotional energy in Emma, while treating my achievements and needs as secondary considerations. The documentation was so thorough that it read like a legal brief prepared for court presentation. And as I reached the final pages of Emma's folder, I realized that this might have been exactly Eleanor's intention. The third and final folder in Eleanor's collection was labeled simply Family, Comparative Analysis and Observations, but it contained something far more consequential than analysis. Tucked between pages of behavioral documentation and psychological assessments was a sealed envelope marked, "To be opened only in the presence of the entire Mitchell family." Inside that envelope was a copy of Eleanor's last will and testament, dated just 1 week before her stroke, along with a letter of instruction that would orchestrate the most dramatic family confrontation in Mitchell history. Eleanor had planned everything with the strategic precision that had made her a successful businesswoman for over 30 years. The will reading wasn't just a legal formality. It was a carefully designed intervention that would force our family to confront decades of documented inequality while the evidence was laid out in irrefutable detail. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The weeks following my discovery of Eleanor's documentation were a strange period of carrying explosive knowledge while maintaining normal family interactions. Eleanor had made me promise not to reveal the contents of her folders until the appropriate time, which she said would become clear when it arrived. Eleanor's recovery from her stroke plateaued at about 70% of her previous function. She could walk with assistance, her speech had improved significantly, but her stamina remained limited, and she required help with many daily activities. After 2 months of living with my parents, she made the decision to move into Sunset Manor, an upscale assisted living facility in Greenwich that could provide the level of medical support her condition required. The transition was emotionally difficult for everyone, particularly my parents, who had grown accustomed to having Eleanor as a daily presence in their home. Despite the challenges of caring for her, they had clearly valued the opportunity to help someone who had been such a strong, independent figure throughout their lives. "It feels wrong not having her with us," my mother said during one of our conversations about Eleanor's move. "She's been so much a part of our family, and now she seems so far away." Emma, who had finally accepted a position as a design assistant at a boutique firm in Manhattan, visited Eleanor regularly at Sunset Manor. The job paid modestly and wasn't the creative leadership role Emma had envisioned for herself, but it provided stable income and benefits while she rebuilt her confidence after the business failure. I continued my weekly visits with Eleanor, though our conversations had taken on a different quality since I had read her documentation. There was an unspoken understanding between us that significant changes were coming, and she seemed to be using our time together to prepare me for whatever she had planned. "Rebecca," she said during one of our November visits, "I want you to understand that what I've documented isn't meant to hurt your parents or Emma. It's meant to create awareness that can lead to better relationships for everyone involved." She paused, choosing her words carefully despite the slight speech impairment that remained from her stroke. "Your parents love you, but they've developed blind spots that have prevented them from seeing you clearly. Emma has potential that's been undermined by too much protection from consequences. These patterns have to be interrupted before they cause permanent damage to all the relationships involved." I asked her directly about her plans for the documentation, but Eleanor remained mysterious about the specifics. "There will be a time when everything needs to be discussed openly," she said. "When that time comes, you'll know what to do." That time came sooner than any of us expected. On a cold Tuesday morning in December, exactly 3 months after her move to Sunset Manor, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. The staff found her that morning when she didn't appear for breakfast, and the medical examiner determined that she had suffered a second, massive stroke during the night. The loss was devastating for our entire family, but it felt particularly personal for me given the special relationship Eleanor and I had developed over the past several years. She had been the one family member who consistently saw and valued my achievements, and her death felt like losing my strongest advocate and supporter. The funeral arrangements revealed one final surprise. Eleanor had pre-planned every detail of her memorial service, including specific instructions about the timing and format of the will reading. Her attorney, James Whitmore, contacted our family the day after the funeral to schedule what he called a comprehensive estate settlement meeting for the following Friday afternoon. Mrs. Mitchell left very specific instructions about how this meeting should be conducted, Mr. Whitmore explained when my father called to discuss the logistics. She wanted all immediate family members present, and she prepared materials that are to be reviewed as part of the estate settlement process. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Whitmore & Associates, a prestigious law firm in downtown Greenwich that had handled Eleanor's business affairs for over 20 years. The conference room was elegantly appointed with mahogany furniture and floor-to-ceiling law books that created an atmosphere of serious formality. Mr. Whitmore was a distinguished man in his 60s who had clearly held Eleanor in high regard. As we settled around the conference table, my parents, Emma, and myself, he spoke about Eleanor's meticulous approach to estate planning and her particular concern for family welfare. "Eleanor Mitchell was one of the most thoughtful clients I've worked with in 30 years of practice," he began. "She spent considerable time ensuring that her estate plan would address not just financial transfers, but also family dynamics that she felt needed attention." He opened a thick file folder that I recognized as containing copies of Eleanor's documentation project, though my family members had no way of knowing what they were about to encounter. "Before we discuss the specific bequests in Mrs. Mitchell's will," Mr. Whitmore continued, "she insisted that I present what she called, quote, contextual documentation that would help everyone understand her decision-making process. What followed was the most uncomfortable hour of our family's collective existence." Mr. Whitmore methodically presented Eleanor's analysis of family financial decisions, emotional investment patterns, and differential treatment documentation. He read aloud from her comparative studies, displayed the charts and graphs she had created, and even showed some of the photographs that captured family dynamics in action. My parents' faces cycled through confusion, denial, embarrassment, and finally a kind of stunned recognition, as the scope and accuracy of Eleanor's documentation became undeniable. Emma grew increasingly pale as the evidence of preferential treatment accumulated, particularly the financial analysis that showed exactly how much money had been invested in her failed business venture. "I had no idea the amounts were so large," Emma whispered when Mr. Whitmore finished reading the financial summary. "I knew Mom and Dad were helping, but I didn't realize." $247,000, my father repeated numbly. "I never calculated the total like that." My mother looked stricken as she absorbed the email exchanges that revealed their private conversations about both daughters. Seeing their casual dismissal of my needs and achievements presented in a legal setting seemed to hit her with particular force. "We never meant," she began, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence because Eleanor's documentation made it clear that intent was less important than consistent patterns of behavior. Mr. Whitmore allowed several minutes for the information to sink in before continuing with the actual will reading. Eleanor's estate was substantial, approximately $3.2 million in real estate investments, business holdings, and liquid assets that she had accumulated over decades of careful financial management. Eleanor Mitchell's bequests reflect her analysis of family needs and her desire to address the inequalities documented in the materials we've just reviewed, Mr. Whitmore announced. The primary shock came in Eleanor's allocation of her estate. To Emma, Eleanor left $50,000 with a stipulation that it be used for graduate education or professional training that would help her develop realistic career skills and financial independence. The bequest came with a requirement that Emma complete financial literacy courses and submit quarterly reports on her progress towards self-sufficiency. To my parents, Eleanor left her personal effects, family photographs, and $100,000 to help address the financial damage caused by their investments in Emma's business and to support their retirement planning. To me, Eleanor left the remainder of her estate, approximately $2.8 million, along with all of her real estate properties and business investments. The silence that followed this announcement was absolute. Emma stared at the table, my parents looked stunned, and I felt a mixture of shock, grief, and validation that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. But Eleanor's will included one more component that transformed the entire situation from a simple inheritance into a comprehensive family intervention. Mr. Whitmore opened a sealed envelope marked personal message from Eleanor Mitchell and began reading Eleanor's final communication to her family. "If you are hearing this message, it means I am no longer able to address these family dynamics directly, and the time has come for honest conversations that should have happened years ago. Rebecca, my dear granddaughter, you have spent your entire life proving your worth through achievement, independence, and self-reliance. You deserve a family that recognizes your value, not because you've earned it, but because you are inherently worthy of love, support, and investment. This inheritance is not a reward for being capable, it's an acknowledgement of the support you should have received all along. David and Catherine, you are loving parents who developed blind spots that prevented you from seeing both of your daughters clearly. You protected Emma from challenges that would have helped her grow stronger, and you took Rebecca for granted because her competence made it easy to do so. This inheritance structure is designed to encourage you to examine these patterns and develop more balanced relationships with both your daughters. Emma, you have artistic talent and creative vision that deserve to flourish, but only if you develop the resilience and practical skills necessary to sustain a career and support yourself independently. The conditions attached to your inheritance are meant to help you build those capabilities, rather than continuing patterns of dependence that have limited your growth. I hope this inheritance will prompt conversations about fairness, recognition, and the different ways that love can be expressed and received. Money cannot undo years of differential treatment, but it can create opportunities for new understanding and better relationships moving forward. This family has the potential to be supportive and loving to all its members equally. That potential will only be realized if everyone is willing to examine their own behavior and make changes accordingly. With love and hope for your future together, Eleanor Mitchell. The silence that followed the reading of Eleanor's letter stretched for several minutes, as each family member processed the implications of both the inheritance and the challenge it represented. Emma was the first to speak, her voice shaky with tears. "I'm so sorry, Rebecca. I never understood how different things were for us." My mother reached across the table toward me, her own eyes filling with tears. "We failed you, didn't we? We completely failed to see what we were doing." My father looked older than I had ever seen him, the weight of Eleanor's documentation and his own recognition of its accuracy visible in his posture and expression. "Eleanor was right about everything," he said quietly, "and we have a lot of work to do to make things right." The will reading ended with Mr. Whitmore distributing copies of Eleanor's documentation to each family member and scheduling follow-up meetings to handle the practical aspects of the inheritance transfer. But the real work, the conversations, apologies, and relationship rebuilding that Eleanor had envisioned, would take place over the months and years that followed. As we left the law office that afternoon, I felt a complex mixture of grief, vindication, and hope. Eleanor had given me more than financial security. She had given our family a roadmap for creating the equal, supportive relationships that had been missing for so many years. Her final gift wasn't just the inheritance, it was the truth, presented with such undeniable clarity that transformation became possible. 6 months later, our family relationships look very different than they did before that December afternoon in Mr. Whitmore's conference room. The changes haven't been easy or automatic, but they've been genuine and significant. My parents attend my professional conferences now, ask detailed questions about my research, and treat my achievements with the same enthusiasm they once reserved exclusively for Emma. Emma has completed financial literacy courses, started graduate school in arts administration, and developed a much more realistic understanding of career development and financial independence. Most importantly, we talk openly about family dynamics, address problems directly instead of letting them fester, and make decisions based on fairness rather than assumptions about who needs what kind of support. Eleanor's inheritance allowed me to start my own biomedical engineering consulting firm, purchase a home that I love, and build the kind of financial security that creates options for the future. But her real legacy is a family that finally learned to see and value all its members equally. Sometimes the most powerful interventions come from people who love you enough to document the truth and are brave enough to ensure that truth gets told, even after they're no longer there to tell it themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.